press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss another update.
Hello children. Our discussion is atomic structure. And this is part 10. Today we will be discussing about, so we have already discussed about different criterias and different things with respect to atom, with respect to electromagnetic radiations, and we have solved certain numericals and multiple choice questions also with respect to it. Today our discussion will be with respect to atomic models. So our discussion today is atomic models. After the discovery of the fundamental particles like electrons, protons and neutrons in an atom, now the emphasis was laid on how exactly these fundamental particles of an atom are arranged within the atom. So in order to explain this, how exactly the atom is an electron, how protons, neutrons and electrons are arranged with respect to each other, different people made different contributions. Some of the people who worked and who are pioneers in understanding the atomic structures are, first one, J.J. Thomson's model. J.J. Thomson was the one who worked on it, so we call that as J.J. Thomson's model of an atom. Let us talk about the first model, that is J.J. Thomson's model. What he considered is, he considered atom to be spherical. In which the mass of the atom is uniformly distributed in the whole of the atom. So he considered it spherical, and the mass, that is protons and neutrons, are embedded in the atom and they are arranged uniformly everywhere in an atom. As protons are positively charged, in order to bring electrical neutrality, what did he mention out is, electrons are present within the atom, embedded in the atom, which are maintaining the electrostatic interactions with the positively charged part. Rest all part is positively charged part, and these are the electrons embedded in it. This model was also called as watermelon model or plum pudding model or raisin pudding model. Raisin pudding model. These are simple things, as general names these are. Now, if you see watermelon, in that you can just take the analogy. The red part of the watermelon is considered here most mass of the watermelon due to the red part, and here the mass is which is due to protons and neutrons. Those protons and the mass of an atom is uniformly distributed. That means those subatomic particles are uniformly distributed in the whole of the atom, and the seeds present in the watermelon are analogous to those of electron, which are maintaining electrical neutrality. So when you open the watermelon and see, you will find out the raisin structure is present on the whole clear red surface. This could explain electrical neutrality, but the concept of orbits could not be explained with it, because later, after there was a working of Rutherford worked on the atomic models, and then there was Bohr's model of an atom. These results were definitely not telling us anything about the motion of the electrons with respect to, because in this case there is no concept of nucleus available at all to us. So his generalization was that atoms are extremely small. Not only the atoms are small, but the mass of the atom is uniformly distributed in the whole of the atom. It could only tell us about electrical neutrality. So the concept is that we know, like excitation, there is no question of excitation in this at all, because there is no question of orbits itself at all. So you cannot say electron can be excited from one energy level to other energy level. In this J.J. Thomson's model of an atom, there is no concept of energy levels as well. So we cannot talk about the excitation and emission of the electrons respectively. Is it clear or not? Now, the radius of the atom was, according to, was of the order of 10 to the power minus 10 meters. And later, due to Rutherford's model also, he kept certain things of J.J. Thomson's model as such, and even said that the radius of nucleus is of the order of 10 to the power minus 15. So the ratio of the two, if you calculate, it comes 10 to the power 5 meters respectively. Did you understand? So J.J. Thomson's model could tell us electrical neutrality. The mass of an atom is uniformly distributed. Nothing like nucleus, nothing like orbitals, nothing like electrostatic forces. Electrostatic forces are existing and they are cancelling each other. That's it. So how electrons are rotating around the nucleus, no concept of orbit, no concept of orbitals, and there is no principal quantum number involved in J.J. Thomson's model at all. Clear? So there were certain drawbacks with respect to J.J. Thomson's model. One of the most important approaches for understanding the atomic model was by Rutherford. So we call that as Rutherford's atomic model or Rutherford's alpha scattering experiment. That's the second model we will be discussing with children. Rutherford's alpha scattering experiment. Rutherford's alpha scattering experiment. One of the most important steps in the development of quantum mechanics. Now let me tell you the prerequisites that Rutherford used in his model. First of all, he took a thin gold foil of the order of 10 to the power 2 nanometers. That's of the thickness of 100 nanometers. Number one. Then highly ionized helium atoms, which are also called as alpha particles. So how you can obtain alpha particles? You have helium, atomic number 2 and mass number 4. When you are ionizing it, ionization energy 1 and ionization energy 2, because you have to remove 2 electrons from helium. So you are giving it 2 energies, IE1 and IE2. So you are getting helium, atomic number 2 and mass number 4 with +2 charge. That means 2 electrons have been lost from it. So this highly charged helium nucleus is called as alpha particle. So we can also write alpha particles have atomic number of 2 and mass number 4, because protons will determine the atomic number, as I mentioned in our first class. That atomic number in a non-neutral atom is decided on the basis of number of protons. Excellent. So these are alpha particles, highly charged alpha particles. Why were alpha particles taken for this experiment and ionized alpha particles? So to come to know that already we have the positive region according to J.J. Thomson's model, and we have positive charges there. Where are these positive charges present? Are they present in a fixed region of an atom, or they are uniformly distributed like J.J. Thomson's model? So it has to be taken as a charge and highly ionized. So this highly ionized, highly charged helium, which we call as alpha particles, were used for the bombarding of thin gold foil of the thickness of 100 nanometers. That's 10 to the power 2 nanometers. Am I clear with the thought? Excellent. Now further, what exactly he took? So experimentally, how exactly he started out the work? He took a source which was producing alpha particles, source of alpha particles. I will write down the short systems here. As the alpha particles were coming out, it was allowed to pass through a lead plate, reduce down the velocities, allowed to pass through a slit, and then behind it one photographic film was kept. A photographic screen was kept, made up of zinc sulfide. In the middle of it, I'll draw it more properly. When the alpha particles were coming from here, one thin gold foil. Lead plate. Now, what is the use of this photographic film on behind of it? Look on this case, children. When the alpha particles were hitting the gold foil, and if alpha particles get deflected, we will have a tiny flash coming into play at extremes. So this tiny flash of light is actually alpha particle which is hitting this photographic film. So it's like this gold foil. When you are passing these highly ionized helium particles through it, if they get deflected, they will get deflected at some angles. If they move straight without getting deflected itself, they will hit exactly on behind of this photographic film. Small deflections, and if there is any larger deflection, you won't find out anything, any tiny flash of light, or you won't find any illumination on this photographic film. Did you get it? Basic clearance. And when observations were made, the results were completely different compared to the J.J. Thomson's model. When he made observations, certain things that he found out was that most of the radiations, which one? Alpha particles, passed through the atom. This was first observation he made. Maximum number of radiations that he bombarded on a gold foil, they passed through. They passed through without even interacting with anything in the atom itself. So this was the first observation he made. Second, some of alpha particles got deflected. Some of the alpha particles got deflected. And if alpha particles are getting deflected, it indicates that it has hit something on its way which has got mass. But because some of the alpha particles have got deflected, it indicates that the whole mass is not uniformly distributed in the whole of the atom. Rather, there is a particular region where this deflection has come into play. Only few alpha particles got deflected. And third observation was very important, which was 1 in 20,000 particles, that is alpha particles, got deflected at an angle of 180 degrees. See, what exactly it will mean? So if we have some highly charged and high mass containing region, once you are passing particles, once you are passing radiations, most of the radiations are passing through the atom. Now, few of the radiations, when you are putting it on a particular region, few of the radiations are getting deflected with some angle. And 1 in 20,000 radiation got reflected at an angle of what degree? 180 degrees. So you can see that on the back of the photographic film, most of the illumination occurred, indicating that, like J.J. Thomson, what he had said, that mass is uniformly distributed. If mass was uniformly distributed positively charged regions were uniformly distributed, then the deflections would have been steep. Only few deflections occurred, indicating that the mass is present in a very small region. Not only that, mass is present in a small region. That means volume is very small. It is extremely dense. And because the deflection has occurred of alpha particles which are positively charged, it has positive charge as well. 1 in 20,000 which got deflected at an angle of 180 degree indicates that this mass is concentrated in a very small region. So the three observations that he deduced out were, what? Most of the particles passed through, indicating that what? Most part of atom is empty. Most part of atom is empty. Because maximum radiations are passing through, illumination is occurring on the back of photographic film. There are tiny flashes of light occurring. That can only happen when it is passing through and hitting the photographic film on the back. Clear? Good. Number 2, some of those got deflected. Some particles got deflected, indicating that it has positive charge which is present in a very smaller region. And 1 in 20,000 means it's extremely dense. So from his observations, he gave 3 formulations. Number 1, what was that? Mass of an atom is not distributed in the whole of the atom. Rather, it is present in the particular small concentrated region called as nucleus. He called that as nucleus. Which has what charge, children? Positive charge depending upon the number of protons in it. Am I clear? Number 2, around this nucleus, electrons are rotating. What are rotating? Electrons. Electrons are rotating in the circular paths, and he called those as orbits. What do you call those as? Orbits. Did you get it? So the atomic model which we have now is that we have nucleus, and this nucleus, around this nucleus, electrons are moving in circular paths. Clear? So the deduction of atomic model which was done by alpha scattering experiment done on gold foil by Rutherford. So it is from his calculations only we got the order 10 to the power minus 10. This is radius of atom by smaller to this is the radius of nucleus. 10 to the power minus 15 is the radius of what? Nucleus. The ratio of the two is 10 to the power 5 meters. Am I clear? Ratio. Okay. So we had nucleus, we have orbits in which what is moving? Electrons. Now we have certain things here. This nucleus and electrons in the orbits are rotating around the nucleus held with the nucleus by electrostatic forces between protons and electrons. But it had some issues with it. It had some problems with it. What were the problems? That Rutherford's alpha, keep it in mind, these two models became the basic for understanding the atomic structure. Now, what were the drawbacks associated with Rutherford's alpha scattering experiment? The drawbacks with alpha scattering experiment were it has given us no information about the arrangement of electrons around nucleus. No information about the arrangement of electrons around the nucleus is given. And also, it gives us no information with respect to energy of the atom, or technically electrons. No information with respect to energy of atom is also given by, we have never talked, nowhere we talked about the energy, because Rutherford's model does not deal with the electronic arrangement. It does not give us any concept with respect to the energy of the atom itself. And one more drawback that it had. See, you can consider Rutherford's alpha scattering experiment to that of solar system. In which, what do we have? In which we have sun in the middle, and planets are rotating around it by converting gravitational force into the circular motion here. So we call that centripetal and centrifugal force. That I will deal in Bohr's model of an atom. However, this doesn't hold true for Bohr's model of an atom. I'll tell you the reason for it. We know there's a simple rule that whenever any charged body is moving, it will keep producing electromagnetic field. Yes? And once it produces electromagnetic field, it will keep losing energy. I will tell you that statement with respect to this Bohr's model of an atom, what exactly is happening. See, we have electron rotating around the nucleus. According to Planck's theory, once it has to move in a circular path, once it has to move, it's a natural rule, once it has to move in a circular path, it has to continuously accelerate. For it to accelerate regularly, because it is continuously changing what? Direction. And accelerated charge will always produce electromagnetic field. So what will happen is, according to Rutherford's model, it's a drawback with respect to the Rutherford's model. What is it? That once it produces electromagnetic field, it will keep losing energy. And when it is losing energy, what will happen? What will be the consequence of that if it is losing energy? What will be the consequence of that? Once it is losing energy, it will keep coming close to the nucleus. It will keep coming close to the nucleus. Keep coming close to the nucleus and fall on the nucleus and destroy the atom. This was corrected later by Bohr, but we know this doesn't happen. And it is correct explanation was given by Bohr in his model. Now you cannot apply this accelerating system for planetary motions because they are not charged species. A charged species will keep producing electromagnetic field. I said yesterday, any body which is heated, if you heat anything, what will happen is there will be high level of oscillation, high level of motion exhibited and high level of changes occurring in the motion of electrons in those atoms. As a result of that, electromagnetic fields are produced. Even I said yesterday, children, that when you look on light which is coming from sun, it is also made up of band in terms of wavelengths. But some of the wavelengths are less, some of the wavelengths are more. We checked yesterday the graph with respect to intensity and wavelength, with respect to intensity, wavelength and temperature as well. Now it will fall on the nucleus and destroy the stability of the atom itself. This was one more drawback associated with Rutherford's alpha scattering experiment. Now these two became pivotal or the fundamental basis for one of the most sought after concepts and most sought after models, atomic models, which was given by Bohr. So we have the next discussion of Bohr's model of an atom, wherein we will make use of quantum numbers as well. Am I clear here, children? So did you understand these two models clearly? What model is it? What are the two models that we have? Bohr's model, J.J. Thomson's model and Rutherford's alpha scattering experiment. Read your books properly and try to understand the phenomena, what exactly are happening there. Right. So be cautious now, because in your competitive exams, most of the times, the questions with respect to the mathematical part of atomic structure is asked from Bohr's model only. And we will take some time for understanding this Bohr's model of an atom. We will do it precisely so that all things are clear. So we are dealing with atomic models. Right. Okay, children. Now our next discussion is Bohr's atomic model of hydrogen atom, or Bohr's atomic model in simple terms. What are the different statements? First of all, Now, according to Rutherford's alpha scattering experiment, we have nucleus, and around this nucleus we have shells. Clear, children? Different statements of Bohr's model of an atom are: number one, electrons are rotating around the nucleus in the regions which were earlier we already know called as orbits. He called those as energy levels or allowed states or stationary states or energy states or simply orbits. We have already mentioned in an atom, according to principal quantum mechanics, we can have 1 to infinite number of shells. So electrons are rotating around the nucleus in the regions called as orbits, wherein the energy of electron is fixed. Rutherford's model was that, Rutherford's drawback in that model, it was that when electron will keep on rotating around the nucleus, it will lose energy. But Bohr said, no doubt electrons are rotating around the nucleus. They are rotating around nucleus. But they have their source of energy present in the atom only. Because this nucleus, I am giving explanation to the statement, children. So nucleus has got charge in it in the form of protons. It is interacting with electrons. So in those shells, interaction, which is electrostatic force, is converted to circular motion. Are you getting it or not? I will use the word centrifugal forces and other things as well. So for that time you remember, keep it in mind, nucleus, electron is able to convert this electrostatic force into what motion? Circular motion. So the source of energy is what? Nucleus, interaction between nucleus and electron. So there is no question of electron losing the energy and falling on the atom. But electron is present in the shells which are called as allowed states. That means in an atom, all shells are not possible. So number one, electrons are rotating in the shells around the nucleus. We call those shells in the form of K, L, M, N, and that word which we are using for it is principal quantum number, which can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on and so forth. Clear? Number two, electrostatic force exists between electrons and nucleus, and it is the electrostatic force which provides the energy source for the electron to keep rotating around nucleus. Second statement. Third statement, with respect to Bohr's model, it is that electron cannot be present. You might think that wherever you go in an atom you will find out the electrons. No, it's not like this. Electrons can only be found around the nucleus at a particular distance. Not everywhere you can find out electrons in an atom. No, only at a particular distance electrons can be found in an atom. And those particular regions are called as allowed states. Why do we call those regions as stationary states also? Because an electron has a fixed set of energy in normal state. Now if you are not heating it, if you are not giving energy to the atom at all, then in that particular region there is a fixed energy. It neither loses it nor gains it if you are not giving any energy. So it will keep moving around the nucleus by that fixed amount of energy and with that fixed velocity itself. That's why they are called as stationary states, because this is not the state, actually an energy level, where an atom, where an electron neither loses nor gains energy. Why they are called as allowed states? Because that's the, what's the second statement? Electrostatic force exists between the nucleus. Not all energy levels are possible. Then only those energy levels in an atom are possible wherein the angular momentum of that electron, MVR, product of mass, velocity and radius, is equal to h by 2 pi, but integral multiple of h by 2 pi. You can have electron present away from the nucleus only at a distance, wherein the electron will be having the angular momentum, because this electron is having mass moving with some velocity v and at some distance r from the nucleus. This product is angular momentum. Only those electrons are able to be present around the nucleus wherein their angular momentum is the integral multiple of h by 2 pi, where n stands for the number of shell we are talking about. So in other words, n stands for principal quantum number, and we know the values of n can be what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So only those shells are possible where angular momentum is fixed. Technically means only those shells are possible wherein the electron is having the angular momentum of integral multiple of h by 2 pi. So you can have 1 h by 2 pi. Now you can have for L shell, tell me what is angular momentum? MVR equal to, for L, what is n value? 2. Angular momentum will be 2 h by 2 pi. So that will be h by pi. For third shell, M shell, what is n value? 3. We already know it in quantum numbers, right? That integral value comes to be what? Quantum number. N value is 3. So it will be 3 by 2 h by pi. That is 1.5 h by pi. Don't say this is a non-integral value. It is 3 by 2 value. It actually 3h by 2 pi, 4h by 2 pi, 5h by 2 pi, 6h by 2 pi. So only those shells are possible where angular momentum is integral multiple. If angular momentum of an electron, naturally angular momentum will change when n value will change, right or not? But n value cannot be 0.3, 0.4, 0.5 itself. So this cannot be a non-integral value itself. So energy has to be fixed. So the statements are what? Electrons are rotating around the orbits, which are called as stationary states, allowed states, energy levels, so on and so forth. Electrostatic force is converted to centrifugal velocity in an atom when the electron is moving around nucleus. Third is that an atom neither loses nor gains energy in that particular shell, which we call as energy states. Fourth statement, I am just giving explanation. Only those shells are possible, which one? Where angular momentum of the electron is integral multiple of h by 2 pi. Clear? Excellent. Now let us go further in details of this. Now, sir, does it mean that we cannot give energy and we cannot excite the electron, because you told us last time there is some ground state and there is some excited state? What did I mention? Ground state. Ground state is the most stable state of that particular electron where it is present. So what can happen is, sir, can we excite electrons from energy level? Suppose this is ground state, right? We will call this one N1. So we will call that as energy state 1. Then this is K, this is L, this is M, this is N. We can call it E4. This we call energy state 3. This we call energy state 2. This we call energy state 1. Am I clear? Good. So we are going away from nucleus or not? Yes. Now tell me, if we keep going away from nucleus, what happens to energy? We learnt it in quantum numbers itself. Energy will keep on increasing. That is, energy is directly proportional to n. We know it already according to quantum mechanical numbers or quantum numbers. So we can write down E1 is less than E2, less than E3, less than E4. That technically means electron will be more stable in which shell? K, compared to which one? 4th shell. If we are talking about hydrogen atom, then we have how many electrons? Only 1 electron. And we know for hydrogen atom, electron is completely decided on the basis of this. Bohr's model of an atom is applicable to hydrogen atom or any uni-electron system. What are the different uni-electron systems we have, children? We have helium plus, we have lithium 2 plus, we have beryllium 3 plus. Uni-electron system means in which the number of electrons will be 1. Clear? Good. So these are different energy levels we have. So and angular momentums also I told you. So this angular momentum is called as, last time I told you, orbit angular momentum. So children, tell me, that time also I told you, when I go in Bohr's model, there I will explain it to you. So this is called as orbit angular momentum, which is nh by 2 pi. And one more thing what I said on that day there, orbit angular momentum, right? So what did I mention about orbital angular momentum? It is root of L into L plus 1 h by 2 pi, dependent upon azimuthal quantum number, dependent upon principal quantum number. I mentioned that clearly. Very good. Now these are different energy states. Now if I want to excite electron from energy level E1 to energy level E2, do I need to give energy or not? Right? So excitation is possible when electron will go from energy level E1 to energy level E2. Now where will electron be more stable, E1 or E2? E1 more stable compared to E2. So in order to move an electron from stable to unstable zone, you have to give energy. Very good. You have to give energy. Good. Once energy is given to the electron, it will move from where? Energy level 1 to energy level 2. So children, energy of electron is due to interaction with the nucleus. Energy of the electron is due to interaction with the nucleus. Now tell me, if I give it energy, it can move from E1 to E2. It can move from E1 to E3. Electron can move from E1 to E4. Electron can move from E1 to E infinity. What is meant by E infinity? Infinity means the region where there is no interaction between electron and nucleus. Now electron's energy is due to interaction with the nucleus. Now when the electron is out of atom itself, what is the energy of that electron at infinite distance? Zero. So remember, energy of electron at infinity will be always zero. Am I clear? Oh, am I clear or not? Right. Now tell me, if I bring electron from infinity within the atom, so if I bring it in the atom, it will interact with nucleus. So initially, at infinite distance, what was the energy? Zero. Yes. Now if I am bringing it within the atom, is it becoming stable or unstable? Now if I bring it in the atom, it will start to become stable. And once it becomes stable, its energy will increase or decrease? Energy will decrease. So the energy will move from 0 to negative. So children, remember, energy of electron in any shell which is present within the atom is given by negative sign. So we can say negative x in terms of kilojoules also, electron volts, you can have electron volts also, you can have joules also, and there are many other units. So in each shell, what is the significance of negative value? Negative value means compared to infinite distance, it's more stable in that particular shell. A very simple thing, if it is close to nucleus, negative value will be more or less. Less negative value or more negative value will be there. If it is close to nucleus, there will be higher negative value. If it is far from nucleus, it will be less negative value. Less negative means more energy. Alright, and more negative means less energy. Am I clear? I will anyway explain when we are doing mathematical formulations of it. Anyway, we are doing mathematics only. So excitation is possible, correct? So which shell we are exciting electron from E1 to E2? Now I'll write it here, children. As we have shifted electron from energy level 1 to energy level 2, the difference of the energy between the two will be given by delta E. And what will be that delta E equal to? It will be equal to E2 minus E1. It will be equal to, delta E will be equal to E2 minus E1. Now children, if the electron is excited to higher energy level, and once it wants to come back, this electron would like to come back to the ground level. Yes, as the electron will be coming back to the ground level, it will lose some energy. Because this is electron losing the energy, it will be an electromagnetic wave. It will have some frequency or not. So frequency associated with the emission will be what? It will be in terms of quanta. Because electromagnetic waves will not release it in terms of direct and continuous wave. It will be in the form of small bundles and packets. In light, we call that as photon. And in this case, it will be called as quanta or quantum, to be precise enough. Quanta is the plural form. So what is the energy of each quantum equal to? So the energy of each quantum equals to h nu. right? So what will be frequency equal to? So here it is not E, it is delta E. It's an energy difference between the two. Yes or no? So what is it? Delta E. Oh, am I clear with the thought? So it is delta E here. So delta E equals to what? H nu, right? I need this, that's why I'm not rubbing it. So I excited the electron from where? Energy level 1 to energy level 2. Even I can excite it to energy level 3 also. So once electron has been excited to energy level E2, what is the energy difference? Delta E will be E2 minus E1. What will be energy difference? It will be E2 minus E1. Am I clear? Very good. Once the electron is coming back to the ground state, it will radiate energy, it will emit energy. What will be the frequency associated with that emission? Because this is electron losing the energy. Electron losing the energy will be electromagnetic wave. Waves travel in the form of small bundles of energy called as quantum. In light, that's called as photon. So energy difference between the two will be the one which it has gained. So delta E will be equal to h nu. That is, each emitted quantum of energy will be equal to h nu. So that makes us delta E equals to h nu. What is delta E equal to? E2 minus E1 by h equals to what? Nu. So this is called as Bohr frequency rule. What is this called as? Bohr frequency rule. So according to that, you can find out the frequency of the emitted radiation by delta E by h. What if you want to find out wavelength associated with that emission also, you can do that. How? So we have equation is very simple here. We have E2 minus E1 divided by h equals to nu. What is nu equal to? C by lambda. How can you find out lambda? Transfer it here. Lambda will be equal to C divided by E2 minus E1. So lambda here. Or transfer lambda here, children. How can we write down? Make it simple for understanding. So it will be lambda E2 minus E1, lambda E2 minus E1 by h equals to C. What am I calculating? Lambda. So if I calculate lambda will be equal to hc divided by delta E. Keep it in mind. So in order to find out the wavelength associated with the radiation emitted, it will be equal to hc by delta E. So wavelength equals to hc by delta E, and what is frequency equal to? Delta E by h. Please keep these things in mind because this will be important during calculations itself. So what do I mean to say here, children, is when electron is excited from 1 to 2, it will come back to the ground level, it will lose some energy in the form of quantum. The energy of each quantum will be equal to faster. Energy of each quantum will be equal to h nu. So this is also called as Bohr frequency rule. So nu equals to delta E by h. And in our further calculation when we do, we will even calculate how to find E2 and how to find E1, because mathematical form of Bohr's model is still to be done. I am on the 5th postulate and its explanation itself. Am I clear? So excitation is possible and emission is also possible. Tell me, which energy level in hydrogen atom can only undergo excitation? Which energy level in hydrogen atom or any atom can undergo only excitation? Which one? So if you have E1, E2, E3, below E1 what is there? Nucleus. So from E1, if emission occurs, will it go to the excited level or it will fall down? Once emission occurs, it will come down. And what is there? Nucleus. It is not possible. So remember, children, in energy level 1, the only thing possible is excitation. And in any energy level more than E1, both excitation and emission will occur. Because in energy level 2, if it emits, it can go to energy level 1. If it absorbs, it can go to energy level 3. Simple thing. If you want to shift electron directly from E2 to E4, then what will be the frequency required for that, energy required for that, more or less? It's very simple postulate now, children, because we have got into energy equations here. Mathematically, we are not doing it. We are doing it theoretically. The theoretical background I am giving first. Okay, now tell me, did you understand the equations here? Good. Tell me now, children, we have atom here. I'll draw that atom here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Question is simple. I want to shift electron from E1 to E2, and then I want to shift it from E1 to E3. Tell me, where is energy more? We know that according to the postulates we have learned so far, energy level 1, energy of first energy level is less than 2, then 3, up to E infinity. Correct or not? So if I want to shift electron from first to second, what will be the frequency required? I'll write that frequency 1 will be equal to E1 to E2. I want to shift electron from. It will be E2 minus E1 by H. Correct or not? Okay, now I want to shift it from, this is excitation from 1 to 2. Okay, and once it's excited, it will come back to the ground level, how much energy it will release, because how much it has absorbed, that much it will release, right? If it is from 1 to 3, tell me what will happen. Nu 2 I will write for that, will be equal to E3 minus E1 divided by H. Now tell me, children, a generalization I am asking you here. If I want to shift electron from E1 to E2 and then from E1 to E3, in which of the two cases I need more energy? That is from E1 to E2, I need less energy compared to E1 to E3. So we can write down frequency 1 should be less than frequency 2. In other words, energy required for the first case will be less than the energy required in the second case. So I need less energy from 1 to 2, but more energy from where? 1 to 3. So frequency 1 will be, frequency 1 will be less than frequency 2. Frequency and wavelength are inversely proportional. So in this case, I need less frequency or more frequency to shift electron from E1 to E2. I need more frequency. That means, I need less frequency. That means here I need more wavelength. Then it will mean wavelength 1 will be more than wavelength 2. I am shifting electron from where? 1 to 2. And 1 to 3, 1 to 4, 1 to 5. So what happens? Energy difference between 2 to 1 is less than. Energy difference between 3 to 1 is less than. Energy required to shift electron from 1 to 4, 1 to 5, 1 to 6, 1 to 7. So can I write down, children, that? What? E2 minus E1 is less than. E3 minus E1 is less than. E4 minus E1, so on and so forth. Okay, other case is also possible here. What is that? I am shifting electron from 1 to 2 and then shifting from 2 to 3. Where do I need more energy? From 1 to 2 or from 2 to 3? You might say same, because the energy levels, the ground state energy levels of the two are changing by 1 only, but it will be wrong. Remember, energy required to shift electron from E1 to E2 will be more than from E2 to E3. Want to see why? Very simple. Because although the energy level difference between the two is only 1, but energy level 1 is close to nucleus compared to energy level 2. So you need more energy to remove the electron from E1 to E2 compared to E2 to E3. Because children, already E2 has got less stability compared to E1. Thus energy required to shift electron from E1 to E2 will be more compared to E2 to E3. So that can also be written in generalization here. What is it? E1 E2 minus E1 more than E3 minus E2 more than E4 minus E3, so on and so forth. Keep these mathematical basic terminologies clear in mind. Once these basic things are clear in your head, children, it's clean in your head, we will prove all the statements what we have done so far mathematically. Okay? And the most important parameter that Bohr's model of an atom gave us was energy of nth orbital equals to what? It's equal to minus RH by n square. Actually minus RH into Z square by n square joules. We know for hydrogen what is Z? Atomic number 1, and principal quantum number is also 1. So for hydrogen atom, we will write energy of nth orbital equals to minus RH by n square, where n is the energy level in which electron is present. Electron can be present in the second shell, third shell, fourth shell, fifth shell. Z will remain 1. However, if it is any other atom except a hydrogen, that's a uni-electron system, then things will change. What exactly I mean to say, children? If there is any other atom, then n may remain same, because principal quantum number for helium plus, it is also 1s1. Lithium 2 plus will also be 1s1. Principal quantum number will remain same. So n may remain same, but Z will change. According to Z, the energies will also change. We will do numericals on this as well, children. So what is the energy? According to Bohr's model calculation, energy equal to minus RH into Z square by n square joules. Energy of nth orbital is given by minus RH by n square joules. Remember, children, this RH, which is Rydberg's constant, that we will do when we deal with the atomic spectrum of hydrogen. And it is equal to, in terms of joules, it is equal to minus, I said a while earlier, sorry, RH equals to what? 2.18 into 10 to the power minus 18 joules. And did you understand why I have used the minus value here for the energy, children? I said a while earlier, when the electron is present within the shell, the value of energy will be negative associated with it. Is it clear? And from the Bohr's model of an atom, we are getting radius also. So radius of nth orbital of hydrogen atom or hydrogen-like species equals to what? A0 into n square by Z. You can have angst wire A0 equals to what? 52.9 picometers or 0.529 angstroms. So what will be the radius of nth orbital given by, children, mathematically? Yes. What will be radius of nth orbital given by? Radius of nth orbital of hydrogen will be given by 0.529 into n square by Z angstroms, or it will be 52.9 into n square by Z picometers. Don't worry, we are going to do the mathematical formulation of this Bohr's model further and understand the energy considerations itself. This is in terms of joules. This value of RH is in terms of joules. Clear, children? Clear? So these are some, so what is energy of nth orbital of hydrogen given by minus RH by n square? Actually the value is radius. What is energy given by? Minus RH Z square by n square. And minus, you understood. RH is, what's RH called as? It's called as Rydberg's constant. It's Rydberg's constant. Am I clear with the Bohr's model of an atom? So whatever I have done so far, I have given you the general mathematical formulations. In our next discussion, we'll start with the full-fledged clearance of graphs with respect to energy and N, energy and Z, and we will prove these things mathematically, that E2 minus E1 less than E3 minus E1 for the atoms like hydrogen. And then once we are done with this clearance of this atomic models clearly, we will move into the spectrum of hydrogen atom, which is the line emission spectrum of hydrogen atom, wherein we will be able to find out this value exactly and what are the equations with respect to wavelength, wave number and different shells. Am I clear? Clear to all or not? Right. So have a proper focus on these children and try to understand these equations more properly. I may have written things left, right, up, down, but just need to focus and try to understand it out clearly. Fine.